Hello students, I hope everybody is well. I'm sorry that we're missing school this week, especially your class, because I was going to see your awesome biome models this week. So I explained this a little bit in the email, but I just wanted to reiterate here that next week we will be doing the biome presentations. Okay, I really want to do that. And so be prepared for the quiz and for giving the presentation in front of class and everything. So this really gives you an extra week to get your model all ready to go. But in the effort to not really miss anything or to leave anything out, I'm going to go ahead and give you the lecture that I would have been giving next week. All right, so that'll put us a little ahead on our lecture time, but it'll allow us to have the time to do the biome models. Okay, and when it comes to lab stuff, I will get to this stuff. Today we were going to play a little game, and so we don't necessarily need to do that. And so the week after next, when we get together for part 2 of our ecosystem talk, I can bring the game if y'all really want to play it. Okay, so let's get started on, remember this would be next week's stuff. Okay, week 20. So you're going to read in your book as you get into that module, that next chapter of the book, about interactions in ecosystems. We'll be looking at ecosystems. That's going to be the group of animals and non-living things that all work together to support certain life in certain areas right here. So you're going to read about a particular relationship that happens between a bird called a red knot and an organism called a horseshoe crab. And in fact, I can bring a horseshoe crab to show y'all in 2 weeks if you would like to see that. They're pretty creepy looking and amazing looking creatures. We'll actually spend a little time talking about them today. All right, so what happens every year is that these horseshoe crabs come ashore in the eastern United States and lay a bunch of eggs. So they come every single year to do that. And there's a creature, here's what they look like. How cute. That's a little baby one right there, right? So they're kind of real prehistoric looking. They call it the living fossil because it kind of looks like something from the dinosaur days, right? And if you turn it over, you can see his crazy looking legs and stuff like that. Some of you who've had classes with me before, you might remember the very large horseshoe crab that I have, and I still have it. All right, here's a picture of the red knot on the left. This is the bird that is going to fly a long way and going to use these eggs of the horseshoe crab to be its food source. We're going to watch a little video here about a scientist who lives in the area where the horseshoe crabs come onto the beach, and they see this migration of the red knot bird every single year. Okay, so they're going to show us, and your book will tell you, that they fly all the way from South America all the way to the top of North America, and they stop in a couple of places along the way to eat. And one of the places they stop is literally the same beach every year, and I think in this particular place it's in Delaware. But on the eastern seaboard, other stops as well. So it turns out that it's very important for the red knot to have this food source. Therefore, it's very important for the horseshoe crab population to be healthy in order for the red knot to have its food source. Now you might wonder, well, wow, do the red knot birds eat all of the eggs? No, the horseshoe crabs produce lots and lots and lots of eggs. So I don't think we have to worry about them so much. Although, you know, keeping our oceans clean and all that kind of thing is always a great idea for the animal life, to support all the animal life. So the idea of ecosystems is having this balance between the animals, the prey, the predator, this kind of thing, and we'll be looking at food chains and food webs, and it's all about energy, right? So why do we eat? Why is this bird eating? It's in order to get the energy to keep moving, and the bird wants to keep moving because it's flying even further to the north. Okay, we're going to watch a little video of a scientist talking about this very, very thing. Oops, sorry, I didn't get it to play. Here we go.
Jared. Welcome to Fun Science Demos here on location on the sunny, sandy beaches of Delaware. Take a look. What do you see? It looks like we're being invaded by horseshoe crabs. Not really. The big idea today is that horseshoe crabs lay eggs. But that's only part of a bigger story. If you take a look behind me, you'll see lots of seagulls and shorebirds. What do you think they're doing? They're eating. They're looking for food. What are they eating? horseshoe crab eggs. So these red knots and other shorebirds eat these horseshoe crab eggs. What do they look like? Well, the horseshoe crabs come up onto the beach where they dig into the sand, and the female horseshoe crabs lay their eggs. What kind of eggs? Take a look. We're going to zoom in so you can see what horseshoe crab eggs look like. These tiny green eggs are horseshoe crab eggs. Green eggs in sand, all clumped together. These eggs will be buried under the sand about 10 centimeters, and they're only a few millimeters big. Some of these horseshoe crab eggs will come to the surface where shorebirds will eat them, and some of the eggs will get washed into the bay where other animals will eat them. And some of the eggs will even turn into adult horseshoe crabs who will come to the beach and lay more eggs. Kind of seems like everything's connected, huh? Well, scientists call it all of that connectedness the food web. There's a very special type of bird that makes a long, long trip, and that bird needs those horseshoe crab eggs for the energy to make that trip. What kind of bird is it? The red knot. Wonder why they call it the red knot? Take a close look. It's red. So what kind of trip does that red knot make? Take a look at this. The red knot starts out in the southern tip of South America, and it flies all the way up to the Arctic. The red knot starts in the southern tip of South America and flies for about 2,000 miles, where it makes its first stop. And then it flies 7,000 more miles until it comes right here in Delaware. So it can eat all the horseshoe crab eggs that are all over this beach. It gets enough energy to make its final flight up to the Arctic. 10,000 miles. If you want to learn more about horseshoe crabs, their green eggs in the sand, and shorebirds and the food web, check out our links in the video description, or check out this book, Horseshoe Crab.
Okay, that looks like a cool book right there. So you get the idea, and you will have read, of course, about that in your book right there. So great deal. Now, I want to talk a little bit, just spend a little time, because I have the opportunity to talk about horseshoe crabs, okay? Because they are really pretty cool creatures. And like I said, the living fossil, you know, because they're crazy looking. There's something really unusual about these guys, okay? And what it is that they have blue blood. What? They have blue blood. Our blood is red. They have blue blood. So it turns out that our blood is red because there's a chemical in our blood called hemoglobin. And these horseshoe crabs don't have hemoglobin. They use a different kind of a chemical to hold on to the oxygen in the blood. And so what we're looking, this picture we're looking at right here, it's hard to tell, but this horseshoe crab, believe it or not, is just folded up and they've tapped into some blood right here. And this whole bottle did not come from this one horseshoe crab because, interestingly, I will tell you, they do release these guys are alive when they collect the blood. It's kind of like, have you ever known anybody, you've talked to your parents to see if they've ever donated blood before. So these creatures are donating their blood. And the reason they're donating their blood is because since they don't have that hemoglobin, we can actually make medications for people who have trouble with their hemoglobin, all right? So they can't be exposed to the hemoglobin. It's very interesting. We're going to watch a video in just a minute. So we collect it in these bottles, so we use it for medicinal purposes. They do release the critters back into the ocean to hopefully, you know, come back the next year and that kind of thing. So it's interesting to see, once again, when we're looking at, you know, this synergy between animals and the environment, we're part of that too, right? And so as long as we're kind to these animals, I think, you know, it's okay that we use this. We're going to watch a little video about how this happens. And I admit sometimes there will be some losses. Some of these guys do get sacrificed. So let's see. Here we go.
During the warmer months, especially at night during the full moon, horseshoe crabs emerge from the sea to spawn. Waiting for them are teams of lab workers who capture the horseshoe crabs by the hundreds of thousands, take them to labs, harvest their cerulean blood, then return them to the sea. Oddly enough, we capture horseshoe crabs on the beach because that's the only place we know we can find them. A female horseshoe crab lays as many as 20 batches of up to 4,000 eggs on her annual visit to the beach. When the eggs hatch, the juvenile horseshoe crabs often stay near shore, periodically shedding their shells as they grow. Once they leave these shallow waters, they don't return until they reach sexual maturity 10 years later. Despite our best efforts, we don't know where they spend those years. Though we've spotted the occasional horseshoe crab as deep as 200 meters below the ocean's surface, we only see large groups of adults when they come ashore to spawn. Horseshoe crab blood contains cells called amoebocytes that protect them from infection by viruses, fungi, and bacteria. Amoebocytes form gels around these invaders to prevent them from spreading infections. This isn't unusual. All animals have protective immune systems, but horseshoe crab amoebocytes are exceptionally sensitive to bacterial endotoxins. Endotoxins are molecules from the cell walls of certain bacteria, including E. coli. Large amounts of them are released when bacterial cells die, and they can make us sick if they enter the bloodstream. Many of the medicines and medical devices we rely on can become contaminated, so we have to test them before they touch our blood. We do have tests called Gram stains that detect bacteria, but they can't recognize endotoxins, which can be there even when bacteria aren't present. So scientists use an extract called LAL, produced from harvested horseshoe crab blood, to test for endotoxins. They add LAL to a medicine sample, and if gels form, bacterial endotoxins are present. Today, the LAL test is used so widely that millions of people who've never seen a horseshoe crab have been protected by their blood. If you've ever had an injection, that probably includes you. How did horseshoe crabs end up with such special blood? Like other invertebrates, the horseshoe crab has an open circulatory system. This means their blood isn't contained in blood vessels like ours. Instead, horseshoe crab blood flows freely through the body cavity and comes in direct contact with tissues. If bacteria enters their blood, it can quickly spread over a large area. Pair this vulnerability with the horseshoe crab's bacteria-filled ocean and shoreline habitats, and it's easy to see why they need such a sensitive immune response. Horseshoe crabs survived mass extinction events that wiped out over 90% of life on Earth and killed off the dinosaurs. But they're not invincible, and the biggest disruptions they've faced in millions of years come from us. Studies have shown that up to 15% of horseshoe crabs die in the process of having their blood harvested, and recent research suggests this number may be even higher. Researchers have also observed fewer females returning to spawn at some of the most harvested areas. Our impact on horseshoe crabs extends beyond the biomedical industry too. Coastal development destroys spawning sites, and horseshoe crabs are also killed for fishing bait. There's ample evidence that their populations are shrinking. Some researchers have started working to synthesize horseshoe crab blood in the lab. For now, we're unlikely to stop our beach trips, but hopefully a synthetic alternative will someday eliminate our reliance on the blood of these ancient creatures. TED-Ed is a nonprofit, and
Okay, so you see there that they were using the blood for the testing thing. There are other applications as well for medications. So at the end there, they're talking about if our environment is messing up the habitat for the horseshoe crab, that would also mess up the food source for the red-knot bird, right? So it's important for us to keep all of that in mind when we're developing land and things like this. So God has asked us to be responsible, right, for our environment. Okay, so let's see the organization here of living things on the planet. We start off with the biosphere. Now, y'all know all about that, right? Because in the biosphere, that means the living sphere, the shape of the earth, we have the biomes, right? So we have those, about 12 different biomes, and y'all were going to be presenting those to show us some of the interesting qualities of each one of those. And so if we take a biome in a certain area and we break that down, we're going to see how we can, the organization will go into an ecosystem, and the ecosystem would include everything living and non-living in that. So in this picture, we see water and maybe a forest. It might be a forest biome right here. It might be a mountain biome, not exactly sure. But if we dial in a little closer, we're going to see a community. And in this particular grassy part of the community right here, we can see a little bird right there and some other things that might be living in there, like, for instance, what the bird eats. And then we're going to go down a little bit more specific, and we're going to see a population of a particular type of a bird. And then we ultimately get down to the organism, a single individual of the population of whatever that is. So we can study each one of those successively, and we need to see that this bird, of course, needs to be able to have a food source that can support its life. It needs the energy along the way. Now I have a page number here, page 116 in your student book. Hopefully that's correct. You know how I sometimes get those wrong because the book's changed at one point and I may not have changed the page number. So hopefully it's right. I don't have a book, otherwise I would check. All right, an ecosystem is a system made up of all the living things and their environment. All right, so not just the living things, but the non-living things. We call those biotic would be the living things, and the abiotic would be their environment. That also would include climate. Like, is it a warm place, a cold place? Does it have lots of rain? Is it a desert? This kind of thing. A community, just under the ecosystem, right, includes all the different species that live in that particular ecosystem. And then we have a population of all the organisms of the same species. So we were looking at that bird, for instance, that live in that ecosystem. And then we have the individual living, the living member of an ecosystem, each living member of an ecosystem. In that particular case, it was a type of bird. We could even say it was the red knot bird, right? The red knot bird that was coming to eat the eggs of the crab. Okay, let's see. So a habitat is the place it lives. Here, we're back here to our biosphere, right? Our ecosystem, community, population, and organism. We're just going the other way right here. In this particular case, our biosphere would be marine, right? Ocean. The ecosystem would include the corals, the saltiness of the sea, the warmth caused by the wherever on the planet it's located. And it looks like here our community is probably, it looks like a coral reef. So we have corals living here, probably sponges living there, different kinds of fish. The population of one kind of fish and an organism, an individual of one of those fish. So the habitat is where they live, in this case, coral reef. The niche or niche of is an organism's specific job in the community. Okay, so this fish right here it is assigned to eat a specific thing, whatever that fish eats. In the case of the red knot, it ate the eggs. In the case of this fish, it might eat a smaller fish, right? And so we're going to see this balance that takes place to keep these fish alive. So here are the non-living things, right? The environment is the non-living part of the ecosystem. It includes things like soil, water, sunlight, the temperature, that would be the climate, air that is around there, So is it warm air? Is it cold air? Is it dry air? Is it moist air? Each living member of an ecosystem is an individual. I believe we're filling these blanks in a page of your book, I believe. And God has designed the sun to get everything started. Okay, so the energy begins there. An important scientific truth is that we need to know is that energy doesn't come from nowhere. It has to come from somewhere. Okay, we call that thermodynamics. I think I'm going to bring that up here in a minute. Let's see if it is there. Yeah, the first law of thermodynamics states that all energy has to come from somewhere. It actually states that energy is neither created nor destroyed. It only changes form. Okay, so it can't be created out of nothing, and it also cannot be destroyed. It just changes. So the sun comes in, and it uses the energy from the sun for plants to make food. All right? Then that food in the plants feeds the animal. Then the animal feeds another animal, right? Now we're looking at that food web, that food chain that's going on there. Okay, so let's start at the bottom or the beginning of a food web or a food chain. All right, we're going to be calling these guys producers. Producers make their own food. Another word we use for those guys is autotroph. It's right here, autotroph. That means self-energizing, self-energy. They produce their own food. Another word for that would be plants. The green plants make their own food from the energy from the sun to make sugars. Those sugars, of course, they're making for themselves, but they make extra. We eat those, and it gives us energy, right? So these are the green plants. They make sugar through the process of photosynthesis, which you should know about. We have carbon dioxide, that's CO2. We have water, that's H2O coming from the roots. We have energy pushing these two things together to make a large molecule called glucose. And glucose is C6H12O6. I'll show that to you in just a minute. That's the molecule and what it looks like. And the byproduct or waste product that it makes in the process is oxygen. Wow, that's pretty cool, because guess what we need? Oxygen and the sugar that's in the leaves, right? So if you had a salad for lunch, then you would have literally be eating the leaves of a plant. So that would be the glucose you're eating. Furthermore, I'm pretty sure you're breathing right now, right? So as you're breathing, you are going through a process called cellular respiration. And you know what we're exhaling? We're exhaling carbon dioxide and water. How about that? So we and the plants have what is known as a symbiotic relationship. They make the stuff we need. We make the stuff they need. How about that? We work together. All right. Our primary consumers are creatures that eat plants. Okay? So a consumer must eat food to get energy. In other words, a consumer doesn't make its own food. We are consumers. We have to eat our food. We're looking at a cute little picture here of a squirrel, and the squirrel is eating. And what is he eating? It looks like maybe a nut, right? Okay. It has to eat something to get its energy, and in this case, it's eating a nut. I believe a squirrel is an herbivore. Herb meaning plants. So herbivores are creatures that eat only plants. So I'm pretty sure a squirrel is an herbivore, and therefore they're going to eat only plants. They're going to get every bit of their energy from plants. All right, so they're known as a primary consumer. They eat a producer. Secondary consumers eat primary consumers. So if something eats that little squirrel, for instance, it's going to get the energy that the squirrel got from the plant, which the plant got from the sun, and you're going to see how that energy is going to travel through the ecosystem. If the consumer eats only only primary consumers, and it only eats that, therefore it only eats meat, it's known as a carnivore. I'm sure you've heard of that. Here's a famous carnivore. Yikes, right there. That tiger looks like he's ready to pounce. All right, so he's going to eat only meat. Doesn't eat any plants at all. Tertiary consumers. Tertiary consumers are going to eat secondary consumers. So let's say, what eats a squirrel? A snake, right? So let's say a snake eats a squirrel. That makes the snake a secondary consumer. What eats the snake? A large bird like an eagle, right, might pick up the snake and eat it. So it would be a tertiary consumer. So these eat secondary consumers. Some of these are carnivorous, but some of them might eat both meat and plants. And if they eat both, they're called omnivores or omnivorous. Most human beings, for instance, are omnivores. So if you eat both meat and plants, you're considered an omnivore, if you're not a vegetarian. Okay, here's an owl eating a mouse or something small like that, and that mouse was probably a primary consumer, so that would make the owl a secondary consumer. Yeah, not a tertiary. I don't think the owl has a predator. It might. We'll see. I think we're going to show the food web here in just a second. Yes, so here's a food chain. Okay, so a food chain shows the order of consumption. All right, so one thing you need to understand about the food chain and a food web is that the arrow, when the arrow points, it says, in this case, the plant, which is the producer, goes into the mouth of this critter. So the arrow goes into the mouth of the insect. The insect, which is a primary consumer and an herbivore, goes into the mouth of the mouse, which is an omnivore, and here we go, a secondary consumer. All right, so notice it's an omnivore, because it eats plants and nuts and things, but it also eats insects. An insect is an animal. Therefore, it is considered meat. And then the mouse goes into the mouth of the owl. And so the owl turns out to be a tertiary consumer here. So primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer, right there. Also, it says here, it tells us right here that the owl is a carnivore, meaning it only eats meat like a mouse. All right, so the food chain shows the path of, I want you to see this word right here, energy. The path of energy from one living thing to another. All right, and at the end of all food chains is something called a decomposer. So the owl would have that as a predator, but only after it dies. A bacteria would break it down and dispense its energy back into the system. It's like a recycling system right there. All right, now food chains are nice, but food webs are more illustrative of what's really happening, a more realistic representation. I don't know if those page numbers are right. Yeah, that doesn't seem right there. So look for something like this picture in your book that's going to show us a food web, okay? So the food web is a more realistic representation of consumption in the wild because many animals can eat many things. Okay, so yeah, be looking for that picture right there, and we'll see if I can find it. So check it out. This is on a page in your book, okay? It doesn't show the page number, so sorry. So, but you're going to see right here, we're going to start with a mouse, right? And we're going to see what all goes around here. So what you're supposed to do then is supposed to write the arrows the way they go, okay? So for instance, the grass will go into the mouth of the mouse, right? So you're going to draw an arrow from the grass to the mouse. Okay, I wonder if the grass also goes to the butterfly. And the grass definitely goes to the grasshopper, right? So the arrow point will go into the mouth of that. Okay, so what about a sunflower? Sunflower butterfly maybe? Yeah, who eats the mouse? Oh, a rattlesnake. The mouse would go here. Okay, so I want you to take a few minutes, maybe pause the video to see if you can figure out how it goes, because the next slide's going to give you the answer, okay? So go ahead and pause. All right. Here comes the next one right here. Sure enough, the grass goes into the mouth of the mouse, into the mouth of the grasshopper. Oh, prairie dog. I didn't guess that one. Okay, because I guessed butterfly, but it was a sunflower that goes to the butterfly. Butterfly goes to the mouse. What else goes to the mouse? Oh, yeah, grasshopper. Oh, look at there. Mice eat sunflowers. They bet you they eat the sunflower seeds, don't you think? Prairie dogs eat sunflowers. Cool. We knew this one. Okay. The mouse goes into the mouth of the rattlesnake. Anywhere else? Oh, yeah, coyote. They eat it. How about that? So you see how complicated it gets with all those arrows around there. Do you see why we call it a food web? It looks more like a web, right? So it gets more complicated than what is normally called the chain, right? So where you would go from, A to B to C to D, right? Here you have all this stuff going on. So that's what we're learning about as far as the lesson goes today, all right? So that brings us to what's the point of all this. The point is energy, okay? We've got to get enough energy to support the predators. Once again, I have a page number here that's 106. I don't know, y'all. I'm so sorry. I hope it's right. Okay, so let's start here at the bottom. This is called an energy pyramid, okay? And it's showing you that down here on the bottom we have the producers. And then we have the primary consumers, herbivores, secondary consumers, carnivores, tertiary consumers, also known as something called an apex predator. Okay, so in order to support one eagle up here, we have to have a lot of plants that support this many rats and this many snakes, therefore that eagle. Do you see what I'm saying? So we need a lot of energy down at the base of this pyramid to support the energy needed by the thing at the top. Okay, so the energy level drops as you move up the food chain or up the pyramid right here. It says here energy is lost. Notice how I have that in quotations. I just told you that energy is neither created nor destroyed, right? That's thermodynamics. So what's going on here? So when I say it's lost, it's wasted is a better word, wasted. Okay, let's think about it for a second. When this eagle eats that snake, there are parts of the snake that the eagle cannot digest. Okay, the bones, for instance, and the scales that are on there. So what does the bird want to digest? It wants to digest the muscle of the snake. Therefore, what it does is it gets rid of, in fact, it creates a special thing called have you heard of the owls do this, an owl pellet, right? An owl pellet, they actually cough up the parts they didn't use. Okay, so therefore that the bones and the scales of the snake that didn't get used by the eagle, those are wasted. The energy caught up in the bones are wasted. Okay, so because of that waste, the number of producers have to greatly outnumber the consumers in order to supply enough energy for them. You know, so like when the snake, for instance, eats the rat, it doesn't digest the hair and the bones, right? It only digests the meat of it, that kind of thing. All right, so once things die, decomposers win in the end, right? They have to take care of everything. It's really very fortunate that we have decomposers. Otherwise, we would have dead things piling up all over the place. I mean, literally, even like dead leaves of trees. Think about it. All those leaves fall to the ground. If year after year they just stayed there, it wouldn't take long before we're covered with piles of leaves. But what happens is we have these decomposers that are sort of secretly hiding away in the dirt and in old tree trunks and stuff like that, and they will consume and recycle the energy left in dead things. All right, so we're looking at a picture here of mushrooms. Mushrooms are one of the most efficient of the decomposers. I want you to understand something, though. This thing we're looking at right here is not the mushroom. The mushroom lives underground. This is called the fruiting body of a mushroom. It would be like looking at an apple tree and telling me it was an apple. Well, it's not. The apple tree has a fruit on it called an apple, right? And that's the same thing. Or the mushroom, this thing, is the fruit of the mushroom that's actually growing underground. And as they grow underground, they are eating away at dead stuff. Right here, it looks like a dead log or something, and it starts to eat away at that. And in times of when it's really good, like lots of moisture, mushrooms like to have lots of moisture, they will produce these fruiting bodies. And guess what they're made for? What is the apple of an apple tree made for? What's inside the middle of it? Seeds. Same here. Underneath the cap of this, there are these little folds. You probably know about mushrooms, right? There's those little folds, and they're called gills. And guess what's inside those gills? Little seeds. They're actually called spores in a mushroom. And the mushroom actually pops open and sends those spores out, which then will grow new mushrooms. How about that? All a part of the ecosystem. Okay, so during lab time, what we would have done today is we would have played a game. If you've had a class with me before, you've probably heard of this game. It's called Into the Forest. And we have pictures of animals and a little energy level on there. And so the plants would have the highest energy, and then the apex predator would have the lowest energy. I think it looks like a 1 right there. The plant probably has 15 points. And then we would have decay that would have, 0 points because they don't have any energy associated with them. They just recycle stuff. And so you would do kind of a concentration matching game, and find something that is predated by something else. So you could pick the fox, and if you overturned another card that something the fox eats, then you would have a matching pair. And you would add up the energy numbers, and whoever had the most numbers at the end would be the winner. So if we have time next 2 weeks from now, we can still play this game if you want to, but we don't have to, okay? All right, so then I will see y'all next week for your biome presentations and a quiz, and then I'll talk to you more about how we're changing our schedule just a little bit, okay? All right, y'all stay warm out there, and I will see you next week.